I'm Claire, 29 years old, and at my grandfather's 80th birthday party, my entire family stood up and humiliated me in front of hundreds of guests just because I sat in the wrong person's seat. They laughed. My mother said, "That seat belongs to your sister-in-law, Vanessa." My brother sneered, "You deserve to sit next to the trash can." I was about to leave when my grandfather tapped his wine glass and called out, "Claire, sit here, next to me." And then, he placed a folder on the table that no one in my family expected, something that would silence the entire room. Before I tell you everything that happened, let me know where you're watching this from, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe that. True recognition doesn't come from blood, but from the values you've quietly protected. I'm just an ordinary accountant living in Westboro, and last week I received an invitation to my grandfather Walter's 80th birthday party, the man regarded as the pillar and emblem of honor in our entire family. The event was held lavishly at an upscale restaurant, with relatives, business partners, and local media all in attendance. But the moment I stepped into the banquet hall, I saw that the seat with my name at the table of honor had been replaced by the name of my sister-in-law, Vanessa. I froze and politely asked my mother, "Mom, was there a mistake with the seating?" But my mother, Margaret, simply replied in a tone as casual as if she were setting the table, "That seat's Vanessa's now. You can sit anywhere." I turned to Bradley, my brother, and was met with a dry, mocking remark. "You, a little accountant, it's all the same where you sit." The entire table burst into laughter. It felt like I had once again stumbled into a familiar play, one in which I was always the side character made fun of. This was nothing new. Ever since high school, I had understood my place in this family. When I received a full scholarship to university, my father merely said, coldly, "At least it saves money." But when Bradley barely scraped through graduation, the family threw a grand party like he was the first in the clan to make it into college. Throughout my growing up years, I learned to stay quiet, to endure, and to fend for myself, while Bradley was handed everything, from his first car to a family company internship. I got used to being asked to give up my seat at dinners, used to being called the one with no ambition, simply because I chose a stable accounting job instead of diving into investment like they expected. But that day, just as I quietly stepped back, intending to slip out of the hall and avoid becoming the butt of jokes, once again, a relative raised their phone to film me standing alone by the side table and whispered with a chuckle, "Now that's a scene you can't miss at every family gathering." Right at that moment, my grandfather, Mr. Walter, gently tapped his crystal glass, and the entire hall fell silent. He slowly stood up, his eyes looking directly at me amidst hundreds turning to stare, and he said, "Claire, come here. Sit beside me." The table gasped. He lightly nudged the chair to his right, the most honored seat, and waved for me to come. Bradley clenched his jaw. Vanessa lifted her chin, her eyes flickering. My mother looked away. I walked step by step toward that chair, as murmurs spread like an undertow. I knew full well this was not just a polite invitation, but a sign that something was about to change. And I was not ready for the storm that was coming. The air in the room seemed to freeze as I sat beside my grandfather. It was the first time I didn't feel tucked away behind some side table, and also the first time he looked at me with an expression both stern and trusting. He stood up, raised his glass, and spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Before the party begins, I have a question for everyone. Who has kept this family from falling apart over the last 5 years?" A few scoffs rose from the far end of the table. Bradley leaned forward, sipped his wine, and laughed like Grandpa was joking. Vanessa glanced at me with a look of pity. My mother set her glass down on the table a little too firmly. No one answered. My grandfather sighed, then reached down and lifted a thick folder onto the table. He didn't say a word, just began opening it page by page. Tax bills, insurance statements, trust fund management documents, all bearing my signature. Familiar papers I had spent countless nights completing, now laid bare before the stunned eyes of our entire family. Bradley raised his eyebrows. "What is this?" But Grandpa didn't respond. He simply flipped to the next page, clearly stating, "Responsible for managing personal finances and company assets, Claire Parker." I never thought he would reveal that, let alone do it at such a public celebration. My heart pounded in my chest, while the words he was about to say could forever change my place in this family. Bradley shot up from his seat, his chair crashing to the floor, drawing startled glances from around the room. His face flushed red with anger, his hand pointed at the folder in front of Grandpa, voice rising. "What kind of joke is this? This girl's been hiding things, secretly controlling the family assets all this time. She has no right." My mother, as if waiting for this moment, immediately took Bradley's side. She leaned toward Grandpa, flashing a cold smile. "You just wanted to humiliate us in front of all these guests, didn't you, Claire? Why didn't you tell your parents? Why didn't you ask for permission before taking charge of things that don't belong to you?" I hadn't even opened my mouth yet when Vanessa, with her usual fake calm, leaned back, arms crossed, lips curling. Honestly, none of this would be a big deal if Claire weren't just a lowly accountant. I just don't understand how someone like her could possibly manage the wealth of a family like ours. Those words weren't jabs anymore, they were direct assaults. But Grandpa remained seated, his eyes never leaving me. He wasn't angry, nor did he rush to explain. He was simply watching to see how I would respond. In that moment, I felt a part of my old self, the silent, enduring one who always stepped back, trying to resurface. But at the same time, I realized that if I didn't stand firm in this storm, all the silent years of effort would remain invisible. And for the first time, I understood. This wasn't about a chair anymore. This was a showdown between truth and the habit of denial. My grandfather slowly stood up, raising his hand to signal an end to the arguing. The room fell silent again, with only the distant hum of background music from the speakers. He pulled out a small recorder, placed it on the table, and pressed play. The voice of the family lawyer, Mr. Wilson, rang out, unmistakable and clear. According to the Third Amendment of Mr. Walter Parker's will, the individual designated to take over the trust fund and related assets is Ms. Claire Parker, under the condition that she voluntarily settles all tax debts, insurance dues, and related legal fees within 2 years from the date the assets were at risk of seizure. This condition was fully and timely met as of last month. The room fell dead silent. Grandpa turned off the recorder, pulled from his briefcase a bank statement, clearly showing the transfers from my personal account used to save our ancestral home from being auctioned off. "She did what none of you had the courage and sense of responsibility to do," he said, his voice steady but cold. I could hear some guests whispering, "Good Lord, so she's the one who saved the house." I thought Bradley was the chosen one. "She looks ordinary but is truly strong." Bradley clenched his fists but had no rebuttal. Vanessa lowered her head, hands entwined. My mother turned away, lips tightly pressed. I looked at the papers, recalling the sleepless nights, the rushed lunch breaks to visit the bank, the moments of paying bills while wondering if I'd make rent. But I had never needed praise. I only needed this house, where Grandpa once took me apple-picking behind the yard, not to become a memory put up for sale. And now, all that truth finally stood in the open, before the very people who once thought I'd always be the one left out. Amid the heavy silence, my grandfather turned to Bradley and spoke in a low voice I had never heard from him before. "Do you remember the day you called me, saying you needed an urgent loan to invest in a real estate project in Nevada?" Bradley flinched slightly. His gaze darted away, but he tried to remain composed. That was a business opportunity. Everyone knows investments come with risks. Grandpa didn't respond. He placed another stack of papers on the table. This time, it was a mortgage agreement using the ancestral home as collateral, signed by Bradley. You didn't just borrow money, he said. You put this entire house up at the bank based on a promise from a broker whose name you barely knew. A murmur rippled through the room. I saw a few guests discreetly pull out their phones to snap photos of the documents. Grandpa continued, eyes still locked on Bradley. Do you know who paid off that loan when you missed the deadline? Bradley was silent. I was silent too. Until Grandpa turned to me and clearly enunciated every word. Claire. Claire used her own savings to quietly save this house, without telling anyone, without asking for anything. My throat tightened. All eyes turned to me, but no longer with contempt. They looked stunned. Grandpa nodded slightly, his voice cutting through the silence. If not for Claire, we wouldn't even have a place to sit and celebrate today. No house. No trust. Nothing that you all still think belongs to you. Bradley stood frozen, his face growing pale. My mother bowed her head, and Vanessa pulled out her phone as if hoping to disappear behind it. In that moment, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt lighter. Because after all these years of being dismissed, finally, I no longer had to hide the things I had done just to keep a family together that never truly saw me. As the tension in the room stretched thin like an over-tightened wire, a calm voice rang out from the guest rows on the right. Excuse me, I can't stay silent anymore. All eyes turned instantly to her. She wore a simple suit, hair tied neatly, and had the precise yet sincere tone of someone from the finance world. I'm Melissa, a former colleague of Claire's at the Eastbrook branch. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the head table. I used to see her come in every morning before opening, stay late after closing, requesting confirmations, copies of statements, even standing for hours just to make sure every legal detail had no errors, not even a misplaced dot. More murmurs spread across the room. Melissa continued. One time, Claire came in with red eyes, saying she'd worked a late shift the night before and didn't have time to rest, but she still pushed through all the paperwork. Not for herself, but to save her grandfather's house. I froze. Melissa was someone I never expected to show up here, let alone remember those days. I bowed my head, trying to steady my emotions, but part of me trembled. Not from fear, but from something that felt like being seen, for the first time in years. Melissa turned to me and nodded gently. Claire, maybe they never saw what you did. But to those of us who walked alongside you, who witnessed your persistence, you don't have to prove anything anymore. I looked up, and for the first time, I met the eyes of Bradley, of my mother, of Vanessa, without fear. I spoke in a calm but unwavering voice. I don't need anyone's recognition. I just need this house not to disappear. In that moment, I was no longer the girl pushed out of the family celebration. I was the one who kept the fire in that house burning through the years everyone else forgot it, and I would not let anyone extinguish it again. Before the truth had a chance to settle, my mother stood up abruptly, her eyes icy as she looked at Grandpa, then at me. Her voice rang out, as if to cut off any shifting opinions in the room. You had no right to do this, Claire. No one gave you the privilege to sit here and expose this family in front of guests. If your father were alive, he'd be heartbroken to see you disgrace us like this. I turned to her, the woman who once left me burning with fever in grade school, to pick up Bradley from basketball practice. She hadn't changed, always choosing outward honor over real emotion. Bradley could no longer hold it in. He slammed his hand on the table, knocking over a glass of wine, and growled, "Fine. If you want to play by the rules, then get ready for court. I'm not going to let you steal the family inheritance with a few accounting tricks." I stayed seated, my eyes fixed on him. No longer with anger, but with resolve. That threat, I'd heard it dozens of times, whenever I stepped out of the role they wrote for me. But this time, it had no power. Vanessa now leaned forward, her lips forming a venomous half-smile. Everyone might be touched by your little story, but I know better. Claire's just exploiting Grandpa's trust to climb her way up. She doesn't have leadership in her blood. She's just a number cruncher acting like a hero. The words cut like a blade through the room, leaving many glancing at one another in unease. But I didn't react. Because I had learned. When truth can no longer be denied, they'll attack your motives. When your worth can no longer be ignored, they'll try to stain it with doubt. But this time, I was ready. I sat up straight, placed my hands on the table, and held my gaze firm, no longer letting them define me with their words. Not one more time. Before the truth had any chance to settle, my mother suddenly stood up, her eyes cold as ice as she looked first at Grandpa, then at me. Her voice rang out, sharp and forceful, as if to shut down the tide of shifting opinions. You had no right to do this, Claire. No one gave you the privilege to sit here and disgrace the family in front of our guests. If your father were still alive, he'd be heartbroken to see you bringing shame to us like this. I turned to look at her, the woman who once stood at the foot of my bed when I had a high fever in grade school, only to leave and pick up Bradley from basketball practice. She hadn't changed, always choosing outward honor over real feeling. Bradley couldn't hold back anymore. He slammed his hand on the table, causing the wine glass to tip and spill, his voice low and threatening. Fine. If you want to play by the rules, then get ready to go to court. I won't let you steal the family inheritance with a few accounting tricks. I remained still, my eyes locked on his, not with anger, but with resolve. That threat, I had heard it dozens of times, every time I did something that stepped outside the role they had drawn for me, but this time it no longer held any power. Vanessa now leaned forward, her lips curling into a venomous half-smile. Everyone might be touched by your little story, but I know better. Claire is just manipulating Grandpa's trust to climb her way up. She doesn't have a leader's blood. She's just a bookworm who can crunch numbers, and now she's pretending to be some kind of hero. Her words cut through the room like a cold blade, causing more than a few people to exchange uneasy glances. But I didn't flinch. Because I had come to understand. When the truth can no longer be denied, they'll attack your motives. When your worth is undeniable, they'll try to tarnish it with suspicion. But this time, I was ready. I sat up straight, placed my hands firmly on the table, and held my gaze, no longer letting them define me with their words. Not one more time. As the last mocking words still echoed across the banquet table, a soft cough sounded from the back row, raspy but clear, like a knife cutting through the poorly staged performance unraveling before us. Everyone turned. An elderly woman with neatly combed silver hair stepped forward, slowly but with unwavering determination. I recognized her instantly. Mrs. Helen, the neighbor who lived right next to Grandpa's house, whom I used to greet when collecting the mail, but never imagined would show up at this drama-laced party. She didn't need a microphone. She stood upright, her back slightly hunched, but her voice was startlingly clear. I have no blood ties to this family. I'm just someone who's lived on that street for over 30 years, but I have something to say. No one interrupted her. She looked toward my grandfather, then directly at my mother, Bradley, Vanessa, and finally, me. 2 years ago, when Mr. Walter's roof started leaking badly after the spring storm, I called Bradley, thinking, as the heir, he'd care. But all he said was, "I'm in a meeting, it's nothing serious, don't make a fuss." Bradley lowered his head, trying to hide his reaction. Mrs. Helen turned to me with a gentle smile. Just a few days later, I saw Claire up on that roof at 6 in the morning, wearing a raincoat, holding a hammer, nailing down each board by herself. It was still drizzling. No one else was there, just her. A soft murmur, Good heavens, rose from the guest rows. Mrs. Helen went on, her voice firming. Family often overlooks the little things, but neighbors see. And I think it's time someone said it out loud. The entire room fell silent. No more jabs, no more clinking glasses, only the pounding of my heart, overwhelmed. I didn't know whether to look at Mrs. Helen or at Grandpa, who now wore a faint smile, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. And I realized then, recognition doesn't always come from where we expect. Sometimes it comes from the quiet eyes that have been watching our journey all along. From those outside the family, who see more clearly than anyone else, who truly kept a house from falling apart. After Mrs. Helen stepped away from the center of the room, leaving behind a trail of silence and bewildered stares, my grandfather remained seated in stillness, as if weighing whether to continue. Then, he opened the old leather briefcase, the one I had only ever seen him carry to his most important meetings, and pulled out a stack of documents. He placed them on the table, right in the center of the tension-laced air, and calmly said, "There is something I've never disclosed, not even to family, because I wanted to wait until the truth was clear and all masks had fallen." He held up the first page, a copy of the original will, stamped and signed by Lawyer Wilson. "This is the official will, legally binding since my last amendment." The table was silent. Bradley stood frozen. My mother squinted, trying to read from a distance. Vanessa gripped the armrest of her chair. Grandpa continued, his voice firm in a way I had rarely heard. "Under the main clause, the person designated to inherit the trust and assets is Claire Parker, provided she fulfills all financial responsibilities, which she has. But there's a secondary clause." He turned to the second page, and I knew instantly it was the part no one had ever seen, not even me. If Claire refuses the inheritance, for any reason, the assets will not go to Bradley or any other family member. He paused for one beat, then pronounced each word with clarity. "All assets will be transferred directly to the Community Fund for Homeless Children, a fund I have quietly built over many years." The room froze. Bradley's mouth fell open. My mother blurted out, almost uncontrollably, "You can't do that. This is the family's property. You can't give it to outsiders." But Grandpa simply lifted his gaze, eyes cutting through every layer of pretense. "This is my property, and I will not let it fall into the hands of those who once left this house to rot." I couldn't say a word. My throat tightened, not because of the money, not because of the inheritance, but because, for the first time in my life, someone had built a system where kindness and responsibility were not just ideals, but legally recognized, not promises, but terms. Bradley clenched his fists, his face flushed, but there was nothing left to hold on to. He couldn't refute the documents, couldn't deny the witnesses, couldn't assert seniority. He turned to me, eyes narrowing, voice dropping into a venomous snarl. "Without me, you wouldn't have made it this far. I was the one who got you your first job. I was the one who introduced you to Grandpa. Why do you think he trusted you? Because you're talented? Number. Because you're my little sister." His words dropped like the last stones from a man drowning in his own pride. I felt the gazes around me, some filled with pity, others waiting to see if I would stay silent as I had so many times before, or stand up. I took a deep breath, then calmly rose to my feet, turning to face Bradley. I wasn't taller than him, but in that moment, I no longer felt small. "You're right," I said, my voice not loud, but crystal clear. "Without you, maybe I wouldn't have existed, as a shadow." Bradley froze. I continued, each word distilled from years of quiet wounds. "But I don't exist to live under your shadow. I'm not your extension. I'm not your excuse to keep playing the hero you never earned the right to be." I turned to Grandpa, who had been quietly watching, and he gave a small nod, as if the moment had finally arrived. He pulled from his pocket a set of old keys and placed them in my hand, in front of everyone. "This house," he said slowly, "from today belongs to the one who deserves to keep it." I took the keys. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Bradley stood frozen like a statue, while Vanessa turned away, hiding her expression. No one clapped. No one laughed. But in that silence, I heard something clearly. For the first time, my voice wasn't brushed aside. For the first time, my words carried weight. The keys had barely warmed in my palm when a round of applause broke out from a corner of the hall. Not loud, not in unison, but clear enough to ripple outward like a wave. A few guests stood up and nodded toward me. People who had only ever known me as Bradley's little sister or the plain accountant niece. They didn't need to say anything. Meanwhile, others quietly left their tables, slipping out through the back door as if trying to escape the discomfort and embarrassment now filling the room. But the commotion flared up again at the family table. My mother slammed her hand on the table, shot up, and yelled, her voice nearly a scream. "You've betrayed your own family, Claire. You've made everyone think we're ungrateful. You've disgraced your father. You've turned the Parker name into a joke." I didn't respond, because I knew this wasn't about me anymore. It was about the image she had worked so hard to build, now crumbling beyond repair. Bradley sat still, eyes fixed on his wineglass like it might speak for him. And Vanessa, for the first time that evening, said nothing. She simply removed the napkin from her lap, placed it on the table, her eyes vacant. My grandfather stood again and tapped his glass. Not hard, but enough to make every sound in the room stop. He looked directly at my mother, then Bradley, then at the entire stunned family, and said slowly, each word landing like nails into wood, "No. Claire hasn't betrayed anyone. It's all of you. The ones who stayed silent, who sat back while this house decayed, who left her to shoulder every debt, who have betrayed us." He turned to me, his voice softening but his gaze firm. "You simply stood up when everyone else had walked away." No one said another word. In that moment, beneath the glow of chandeliers and the clinking of expensive glassware, I understood. True recognition doesn't come from applause. It comes when those who once dismissed you are forced into silence. I thought the party would end in silence, or with awkward handshakes and stiff goodbyes. But as I followed Grandpa to the back of the room, just about to sit down to catch my breath, a young woman in a neat business suit approached. She held out a lanyard. "Clara Jennings, Community Affairs Reporter, Northborough Times." I was startled. She smiled politely, but her eyes were sharp and clear. "Sorry to interrupt. I'm here as a guest of Mr. Walter's associate, Blake, from Landstone Development. I was invited personally. But after what just happened, I believe tonight's story is no longer a private matter." Before I could answer, she lifted her phone, its screen still displaying a video recording app, clearly having captured much of the evening's explosive events. "I didn't come here to record," she said, "but when I saw a young woman being attacked by her entire family, only to be publicly defended and entrusted with the family legacy by her grandfather, that's a story anyone who's ever felt overlooked needs to hear." My heart sank. Behind me, Bradley took a step back, as if hit by a bullet. My mother immediately stepped forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "This is a private event. You have no right to publish anything." But Claire remained calm, almost unnervingly so. "I can blur faces, disguise voices if necessary, but what happened here is no longer private. Not when everyone in this room witnessed it, and some have already shared it." She gestured to a few guests, whispering nearby. Some were texting, others had live-streamed minutes ago. The story had already slipped out of anyone's control. A headline was already forming. "Dismissed granddaughter vindicated at inheritance party, given keys and public recognition by patriarch." I didn't know what to say, but Grandpa just nodded, as if he'd foreseen this before the party even began. "Let her report it," he said gently. "This family has hidden behind its reputation long enough." My mother was practically trembling with rage, and Bradley turned away muttering something inaudible. But I stood still, not because I wanted attention, but because for the first time, the spotlight wasn't on the glory of the pretenders, but on the truth. The party ended in quiet disarray. Brief, stiff goodbyes, a few half-hearted handshakes, and more averted gazes than the usual cheerful chatter of family gatherings. When I left the restaurant, night had fully fallen, and the April wind carried the cold scent of rain through my hair. I thought everything would end there, but not even 20 minutes later, just as I opened my car door, Bradley was already standing by the curb, hands in his pockets, eyes shadowed like he'd forgotten what light looked like. "You think you've won, don't you?" His voice was low but strained, as if he were clutching at the last thread of his pride. I didn't reply. "I'll sue. Demand a share. No matter what the lawyers say, my part is biological inheritance. You can't take it all." I turned to him, not angry, not afraid, just looking at someone who had lost the game and couldn't accept it. "Go ahead," I said softly. "But you'll lose. Not because I'm stronger, but because nothing is a secret anymore." He clenched his fists, took a step forward, but stopped when he saw Grandpa, emerging from the restaurant doorway, cane in hand, walking toward us. "Bradley," he said, his voice not loud but sharp enough to pierce the last layer of defense. "If you continue, I won't just let the lawyers handle it. I'll make public your entire financial record, the hidden loans, the misuse of company credit, and the land sale contract you pressured Wilson to conceal." Bradley's face drained of color, his lips pressed tight, but he said nothing. Grandpa continued, eyes never leaving his eldest son. "You didn't lose the legacy. You burned it yourself with your ambition and disregard. Claire, she just swept up the ashes with the same hands you never cared to see." In that moment, Bradley turned away, retreating quietly like a shadow, with nowhere left to hide. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt free. Not from Bradley, but from the constant need to fight just to exist. When Grandpa laid a hand on my shoulder, his gaze softened, and I knew the storm had passed. And tomorrow, I would begin again, no longer afraid of anyone in the very house that once rejected me. The next morning, I returned to the ancestral house, once the backdrop to countless cold holidays, silent dinners, and rooms where I was always assigned the final place. But today, I no longer held the keys like a temporary guest. I walked through the old wooden gate as the rightful keeper, not because of documents, but because I had preserved this house with my own hands. The old alarm code, the one Bradley had set, was replaced with a new one. I called a locksmith, cleared the storage room, checked the western roof, the same spot Mrs. Helen had spoken of. When the repairman asked, "Do you want to keep this old wooden staircase?" I answered, "Keep it. Every crack is a memory. They'll remind me why I'm still here." That afternoon, my mother and Bradley appeared unannounced on the doorstep, faces twisted in a mix of fury and wounded pride. "You don't have the right to change anything in this house without consulting the family," my mother said, gripping her old handbag like a badge of authority. I didn't argue. I stepped out, stood tall, and spoke, for the first time in my life, without bracing myself. "From today, this house follows 3 principles: respect, safety, and boundaries. Anyone who cannot respect others will not step past this door. Anyone who brings threats or manipulation will be asked to leave, and anyone who still sees me as a shadow can stay in the past." Bradley stepped back. My mother looked ready to respond, but my eyes no longer held any trace of hope, and her words simply dissolved. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood on the front porch, on the red brick floor, where Grandpa once held my hand, when I was small, and I said aloud what I had carried silently for over 20 years. They turned and walked away, and I didn't feel loss. I only felt, for the first time, that this house was truly mine. Not to possess, but to rebuild. By the principles I've chosen to live by. That night, just after I turned off the stove and wiped away the first drops of rain from the windowsill, Grandpa knocked on the door. Not loud, not abrupt. Just 3 soft knocks, like he had always done since I was a child. In his hand was an old, worn, blue wooden box, the corners frayed, the small front lock broken long ago. He handed it to me without a word. I took it, heavier than I expected. "Open it," he said gently, sitting near the fireplace, eyes fixed on the flame. I sat on the floor, placed the box on my lap, and opened the lid. Inside were things I had never seen before. A photo of me in primary school, smiling wide while holding the stuffed dog I thought Mom had thrown away. A messy drawing I made at 8 of Grandpa in a hat with scribbled words underneath. "Grandpa is a superhero." But what made me breathless was a stack of handwritten letters, ones he had written to me on every birthday, each time I earned a scholarship, every time I called and he couldn't pick up. "My granddaughter is brilliant. They don't see it, but I do. Today I heard you paid off the tax debt. I wanted to hug you so tight, but I didn't want to make you feel you had to stay strong. You're holding this whole family together and no one's standing with you. Don't let go, Claire. I'm right here." I held each letter, the paper yellowed, the ink smudged, and my tears fell freely. Grandpa said nothing, simply sitting still, as if knowing I needed to pass through the moment myself. When I looked up, he simply said, "I know there are things you can't say in front of others. But I want you to know, I didn't choose you because you paid debts. I chose you because you never gave up. In this house, only you did that." I didn't reply. I simply rested my head on his shoulder, like a child no longer needing to hide her weariness. And in that quiet moment, I knew. The love I once thought I never had always been there. It had simply chosen to exist in silence, just like I had all these years. The next morning, as April's first sunlight streamed through the old living room window, I stepped out onto the porch, the very place I had once stood, always feeling like an outsider. Today, I stood in that same spot, hand resting on the worn wooden railing, letting the memories return like the first breeze of the season. I remembered my 10th birthday, sitting alone in the dining room because Mom had forgotten to order the cake, while Bradley had a full party with banners and guests. I remembered when Mom told me, "Don't make a fuss," after Bradley lost my tuition money on a failed investment. I remembered the New Year's Eve 3 years ago, when everyone toasted Vanessa's promotion while I stood washing dishes in the kitchen, no one asking if I was tired. All those memories returned, not to torment me, but to remind me I had survived, not by defeating them, but by refusing to let them erase my worth. Grandpa stepped behind me, said nothing, just placed his hand on my shoulder and stood quietly, looking out at the small front garden. The one I had once cleared of weeds alone while everyone else was busy with more important matters. He spoke slowly. "You didn't just keep this house. You preserved the soul of this family, the part everyone thought was gone." I turned to him. No need for thanks, just a quiet nod. I don't know whether Mom or Bradley will ever come back or whether they'll truly understand what went wrong. But I know now. I don't need that recognition anymore. I am not a shadow. I am not a substitute. I am Claire, the one who held this house together when everyone else walked away. And now, I have the right to choose, to forgive, if they learn respect, to keep distance, if they continue to diminish, to rebuild, not to prove anything, but because I deserve a good life. I stood there, in the morning light, with a feeling I'd never known before. Freedom, in the very place that once imprisoned me. No one controls me now. No voice defines who I am. From this moment forward, it's just me and my choices. I stood on the porch, hand resting on the newly painted doorframe, listening to the breeze tapping softly against the old window panes, and for the first time in my life, this house didn't feel cold. It was no longer a place filled with judgment and silence, but one I was beginning to rebuild. Brick by brick, door by door, principle by principle. Tomorrow, I'll replant the flower beds out back, fix the chandelier in the main hall, and write my name on the utility bills. Not to boast, but to remember. I kept everything I once thought was lost. I know there will still be people who think I'm selfish, that I betrayed the family, that I'm just someone who seized an opportunity. But if you've ever been pushed aside in your own home, asked to give up your seat at a family meal, silenced while being mocked in front of relatives, then you'll understand. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't to forgive or to fight back. It's to stand up without anyone's permission. If you've lived through something like that, I want you to know. You're not alone. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're from, what you've survived. And if you believe in your own worth, even when your family denies it, hit like and subscribe. Because stories like this aren't told for revenge, but to remind each other. The most important recognition always comes from within.